Okay, this is Ed again in San Diego. Welcome back. It's 28 August in the year 2024. And let's welcome Hampton Dowling, who's coming to us from the Washington, D.C.
Hi,
area,
Ed.
and Dr. Ken Lloyd, who's in San Fernando Valley in L.A. Welcome, guys.
Thank
We are
you.
expecting a couple of others, and we'll let them in when they get here.
Well, Ed, you're
Let's
the only one
see.
that's important. We know that.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. I'll let them in. Okay, so this is a global TV talk show and business unit of globalbusinessnews.net. And just looking at my green room here, seeing who's there. Okay, and welcome. This is the C-Suite, where we're going to discuss business and rather than talent, although talent is part of that, but it's all about what's going to happen in the world of business. And with us is Hampton Dowling, as I mentioned. He's has been involved in at C-level for years and is sought after for his international business experience. Dr. Ken Lloyd has PhD in organizational development and things related to talent. We'll get into that in just a second, much better than me, and is the author of one of the dummy books.
Oh,
Ken, why don't you tell the audience about the dummy book? How did you get into that? I mean, did you have qualifications?
Qualifications or reservations, pick one.
I need to sign up for an autograph copy. I need one.
Done. We see we have a couple of new entries here, but real quickly, 15 years ago, the folks at Wiley Dummies Division asked if I would write a book on performance appraisals and phrases for dummies. And I'd written a number of other business books along the way, and I was more than glad to do it. And basically, they just came back to me earlier this year and said, will you do an updated new edition of it? Which I agreed to do because so much has happened in performance appraisal from the once a year, oh my gosh, walk in and nobody can stand it, versus continuous feedback, more forward focus, coaching, employee development, two-way communication. It's completely different today. But I did add, and this was at their request, in the first one, 3,200 phrases. This one has 3,400 phrases to help managers in writing comments about their employees. So that's kind of a fun part of the book. And that's really where it is, though. They did not pitch this to them. They came to me and asked if I would do it.
No, that's really good. Welcome, Dave.
Hey,
David
good morning.
Edick Jr. from San Diego, east of here. I'm in downtown, and he's out in Mount Helix area. And so, David, meet Hampton Dowling, who's
Hello, Dave.
a
Good morning.
business executive, C-suite, based in Washington, D.C. area. Pardon my scratchy nose. And Dr. Ken Lloyd is in L.A. in the San Fernando Valley.
Good to see you,
Uh,
Ken, again.
You too, David?
So the guys are just introducing themselves, and I'm on the sidelines here. So I welcome you back. It's been a while, and I read with interest that you've decided to enter again the executive leadership of San Diego World Affairs.
Indeed, back again. I served as president for a little over 3 years in 2013, 2016 time. I've been involved in San Diego's international affairs community since I graduated from university, and been president of the San Diego Sister Cities program, San Diego Vladivostok, set up the San Diego Panama City, and San Diego Jalalabad as well. And now back as president of San Diego World Affairs Council at a very interesting time for our city and for the country and the world.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in just a moment. My friend Hampton Dowling has spoken in my Washington, D.C. meetings live, and not only at the National Press Club, where I held a long-term membership when I was more active, and has been on a TV talk show. He is very busy guy. He's been an interim executive recently and looking at other things now. Um, in the background, or I guess still currently, you were involved in international maritime, is that right?
I've always had a background and a focus on maritime. It came after my just being in the Navy for an entire career and having a ship, but also been centered a lot on logistics. A lot of it just maritime logistics, shipping. It's a very, very complicated mosaic of issues that affects everything. And so it's kept me on the move with a number of clients and locations. I'm still an editorial director of Latin America's largest maritime logistics magazine out of Panama. So, um, it's today the maritime subject matter is enormous, especially as just here in the U.S. In a month. There'll be a large port terminal operator strike, most likely, and it'll shut down 6 of the U.S.'s largest ports. And that's a loss economically of about $2 billion a day. So you can
And
imagine
it's
what will
coming
happen to
at
LA
the
Long
in
Beach.
the and it's coming at the pre-Christmas rush time.
Well, most everything that's needed in the stores for Christmas is landing now, and they're pushing it very hard, but it will have an impact. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
So
If you,
I read an article a while ago in my research for the Latin America series that I've been doing and will
Mhm.
continue to do, about the choke points, maritime choke points. Of course, it's impacted even more severely with the war, Middle East and South China Sea stuff with the Philippines. But and I'd like you to address that sometime. But more so, I want to bring Dave in up front now. Dave, to you, if you could tell our audience in studio and out there in the world about your experience working overseas, particularly Russia, Mexico, Latin America.
Right. So really a large portion of my professional career has been involved working in or with Russia commercially, NGO, um, uh, and seafood export out of Mexico. Turned around an export operation there and helped certify a number of processing plants to go to Europe. And ultimately, in terms of trade, it's all about logistics. I stitched together from puzzle pieces laying on the road, basically, to ship cargo from Europe into the Russian Far East. So I and looking to ship stuff out as well. So I know about this. And we've been going through just a rolling wave of shocks to the system. And I understand about choke points, but no one really not many had thought through the consequences, say, of a pandemic. Really, that was fun. And we're still dealing with some of the waves coming out of that, and the war in the Middle East, and the Houthis basically blocking up the Red Sea, and a labor strike in Canada which has consequences for parts of the U.S.
Mhm.
And now what seems to be a forthcoming strike on the East Coast, which is going to get interesting. So the bottom line is there's another series of inflationary waves coming through the system, maybe not supported monetarily, but definitely cost shocks for businesses and consumers around the world, most of which are unanticipated. The sexy stuff is to sell things, to make money, to play in finance. But if your logistics aren't working, go home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Talking about logistics, here down the street from where I am, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Dave, is uh, is 2 projects in construction. Um, just completed. The structures is the revamped U.S. Navy headquarters area, which has been turned into a business park with beautiful buildings. the hotel portion has lost its financial partner, so there's a big parking lot there right now.
Ouch.
Under the parking lot is the structure for a 40-story ultra high-cost hotel that the Manchester group was developing. Manchester Group has previously won the right to develop this U.S. Navy land, and has done a beautiful job. They brought in a partner from the Boston area, IQHQ it's called, and there's big money, and they build the office centers. They made a grievous error in relying on the high-tech scientific healthcare biotech, which is, of course, worldwide, but really headquartered around 20 miles north of where I'm sitting right now in downtown in La Jolla area, Torrey Pines east. And they went after the biotech companies that are already situated. And the reason why they're situated north of downtown is because of available land, of course, and immediate connection with UCSD, and with all their research right in La Jolla. And that's why they refuse to get into this beautiful office park that's just been completed, and it's sitting empty for the most part. And it's right across from the USS Midway, the old aircraft carrier, which is a hugely popular museum piece now, right on the waterfront, next to Seaport Village. And right behind me, a block and a half away, is the second project, which is empty. And there's huge private equity capital involved, but it's sitting empty right now. And they're dragging their feet and constructing it. Further down the street in downtown San Diego is huge new apartment towers, buildings. And not all, but they're sitting empty right now. And so the commercial real estate scene in downtown San Diego, although the investment capital flowing in has been unreal for the past 5 to 7 years, the next level is development and renting, leasing, and it is vacant. So we got some problems happening right here in beautiful San Diego, and your expertise, Dave, is in the World Affairs Council and bringing people together and using their smarts rather than their wallets. I think is going to be the way to go here. And I bring that up because my good friend Hampton has keen insights. This is not a political show; it's strictly business. But we all know politics will impact everything we do. So, Dr. Ken Lloyd, what do you think about the way that private equity is splashing money around, and they seem to have missed a heartbeat by not shifting into getting AI companies to fill up this space? That's my view.
Yeah, that's interesting because I typically regard these folks as having very keen insight, forward focused, and typically making some interesting strategic moves. Although now I'm not in a position to criticize them all, but I do think sometimes the objective is to get in and do something, whatever that something is, increase the value dollar-wise and get out. And sometimes there can be some short-term thinking. I've seen that occur as well. So I've seen brilliant moves by these entities, as well as some, you'd call it kind of a lack of planning. We've got all the infrastructure put together, but what are we going to put into it to make it all work? I think it just varies from one entity to the other. So listening to you, it sounds very disappointing in beautiful downtown San Diego to have this gap. But a lot of cities are experiencing this with hybrid workplaces. It is
Right.
tougher you build an office building and you see that the company is saying, you know what, we'd rather have the employees come in 2 or 3 days a week. That impacts everybody. All the merchants around those buildings are suffering. The restaurants, the little shops, the repair shops, and all, they're struggling because the individuals that used to fill these buildings are not there. So yeah, we're in a very different phase. I'm wondering if some of the planning for these structures that you're describing actually occurred before this movement toward hybrid work came into play. So now it's a
Well,
question.
the money was founded when no interest, zero interest, 1%, long time ago. So that's where the money came from. So there's plenty of it, but they didn't apparently plan how to shift gears instead of going after apparently only after biotech to set up executive offices in this super high priced downtown area here. And they just blew it.
Yeah, a
And
lot of the
so,
biotech companies are attracting people because you don't have to go into the office. So they're all around the world with their employees. And suddenly here we are with this giant empty office space or even empty building. And that's a problem. I think that happened very fast. And I think it did catch a lot of very bright, forward-thinking people a little bit off guard. So now how do we make the next move to deal with those?
so let's go to Hampton.
I
He's
think,
got a perspective.
well, I think it's going to be very hard for a very long time. Typically, the market verticals that are rather resilient are able to pivot on a dime are your high caliber technology sectors, biochemical and so forth. But for the other thousands of, market sectors, that pivot is like trying to move a ship. And the cost of capital is through the roof right now for most companies. The amount of available funding for investment right now in North America is dried up, unless you're really in some of the technology sectors. Family offices, investment institutions are just very hesitant about making investments in either infrastructure or manufacturing capabilities because they don't know what that future looks like. You have labor force issues, you have inflation issues, and actually a recession issue. And then there's also the idea about trade and import ratios. So the combination of the cost of capital, the cost of goods sold, which includes obviously the cost of labor, certainly where you have mandatory compensation costs like minimum wage. All these factors are a tremendous confluence on market verticals, which are naturally not able to pivot very quickly.
Sorry.
Yeah, tons of uncertainty.
It's very difficult. I was the chairman of Virginia's International Trade Committee for a couple of years. And, Virginia was very aggressive in attracting foreign direct investment. A lot of that is drying up right now around the United States, just because the U.S. is not viewed as a safe haven for a number of reasons. Hopefully that'll work itself out over time. But, for companies, especially those that are not really the Fortune 250, your mid-sized companies, trying to understand what are they going to do. It's hard to come up with a 5-year plan, which we're used to, just you can't do it right now. So if you try to even look out 24 months, how do you do that when kitchen inflation is really around 50%? It's hard. So when I talk to my clients, the question is, well, what does next year look like? I have to make some sunk cost investments. And so, that's hard. And, Washington is kind of an inoculated place. I mean, we feel things less than other parts of the country just because of the federal workforce and a number of other things. But one thing that is, I think, personally affecting companies today is when we have such a high remote workforce, the amount of proprietary information that's lost because of the connectivity is enormous. Industrial espionage, the ability to carve out information which is otherwise protected in hardened infrastructure and buildings and so forth and industrial campuses. So when you have people that are connected around the world, technology is pivoted to take advantage of this distant workforce. And I have a number of relationships where the loss of proprietary information and the compromise of employees is growing. And we don't really think about that very much, but it is true. It's a very complicated environment right now for sure.
So let's talk about maritime. So the Port of Baltimore has opened, but now it's threatened with shutdown. So isn't that a national emergency kind of a situation, Hampton?
Well, our ports, our ports are generally not as resilient or as efficient or effective as other Group 1 ports outside the United States. A lot of reasons for that. It's unfortunate. Separate from that, our infrastructure is vulnerable to espionage. It's vulnerable to labor strikes. I mean, just because if we have labor strikes in the United States, there are other ports that are able to take some of that port loading, but we don't have the flexibility that people would think we do. We have some, like from China, it's faster to move cargo through the canal to an East Coast port to get to the center of the United States than entering through a West Coast port. Number of reasons for that. So if we have labor strikes here in the East Coast, which is looking to be pretty likely, that's going to completely overload the West Coast ports. They'll drive to the Gulf Coast. Well, there are some rail and highway problems there. The Panama Canal right now is recovering from a drought, and they're very soon going to be at 100% capacity. So when you shift supply chains and simply where ships offload, it has an impact that is consequential and will last for several months. And it does become a security issue. It does affect, again, when it gets to companies, it does affect the cost of goods sold, the availability of products. So when you mentioned Christmas earlier, it will have an impact. So what does that mean to the population? What does it mean to the fabric of society? All sorts of non-monetary issues. But there are going to be a lot of losers when you have a port strikes of the consequence that we're thinking about. Huge.
Dave.
Well, I agree, and, coming back to some of the things that Hampton was talking about, it really boils down for companies is loads of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to be president of the United States, come the end of January next year? That will matter to a lot of companies and
Mm-hmm.
their investment plans. There's actually been quite a slowdown, not just in new investment, but investments that were planned.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of hedging going on. Good luck at you're making a bet. You might as well
really
go to
are.
the casino.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to go to your board and say, well, today at the casino, it's like you don't have to pay much for people to go to the casino. If you're hiring people for millions of dollars a year, you're expecting something, I hope. But the uncertainty everywhere, uncertainty is not new. I would just say that the volume of it is really unusual. Geopolitics have definitely come onto the scene here. Businesses are normally this is not something that they have the skill set to deal with, and I would say rightfully so.
Right.
But here it is, and it's not just businesses in the United States, it's everywhere. Interesting, Hampton, you mentioned about the slowdown on inbound investment. That's an interesting one, because the inbound flow, driven by things like the Inflation Reduction Act, sucked a lot of investment capital away from Europe and even Asia into the United States in support of effectively subsidized investments. But now that the dollar, I think, is clearly peaking out, if U.S. interest rates are going to come down, the dollar is going to come down. That may have some good news for our trade position down the road sometime, maybe.
It's hard to tell. I mean, right now last year there were over 15,000 restaurants and stores closed in the United States. Right now we're on schedule to beat that number. Just the number of restaurant chains that are closing, the stores that are closing. I mean, even Walmart is shuttering some stores, and it's
Sure. Yeah.
Amazon is scaling back. So, if the cash flow isn't there, the discretionary income expenditure is not there on the part of consumers, then even though we have a Inflation Reduction Act, which is largely based upon U.S. borrowing, it's not going to be effective. And foreign investors they're hesitant to come to North America. Canada is probably feeling it worse than anybody right now. And
so the rail strike would be a major blow to Canada.
it will
Yeah.
it will decimate Canada. It will be
The
terrible.
Canadians are, I don't know if it's so much a warning for the U.S. Some of the things that happened in the U.K. or in the last couple of years, maybe even more so, but the Canadians are in for an extended rough road, and the timing of this rail strike is certainly unpleasant. But they have huge challenges in Canada. For most people, the Canadian economy is deep in recession. Asset values are falling fast.
Well, the manufacturing base is suffering. For our strategic industry here in the U.S., depending on what your source of information is, but between 68 and 75% of all the critical minerals that are required for our strategic industries are all controlled by China, or the supply chain is managed and controlled by China. And they are slowly turning the spigot off for a number of those critical minerals. And that's going to have an enormous effect on manufacturing. And when that happens, and it is happening, the cascading effects on our economy are huge. It will affect our ability to export products because we won't be manufacturing. Right now, we're really at a low ebb of manufacturing as it is.
Yeah,
so these are huge problems, even for mid-sized companies that are manufacturers. They're gonna get hit so hard, and when they shutter and close, then what do you do with those employees? What happens to their? I mean, it's not a good news story.
So the politicization of trade, we're just getting started with that. First we're dealing with the geopolitics, but the domestic politics of trade are rapidly flowing into this, and that injects just massive uncertainty, and I assure you it injects increased costs everywhere. There's no cost cutting. There's no economic benefit for the pathways that many countries around the world are choosing, and that includes the US and China. This is a risky path that we were all embarked on.
But there's very little that we can do. I mean, organizations like, David, you were talking about, transformation organizations and all that. When I offer advice to companies at their executive level, it's, what do I do with my organization? I have to make some decisions, and they're consequential decisions. They affect people. They affect the organizational structure. A distributed infrastructure. You start shuttering locations. I mean, it has an enormous impact, and there's very little good news you can tell somebody. All you can do is manage risk, control your costs. You move people more from full-time to part-time, but what impact does that have on the organization, both structurally and the fabric of the morale and the culture of a company? I've found it very difficult to give advice to clients today without having to get really into the weeds of their organization, find out what their weak spots are, and come up with some temporary fixes. So, because Ed, you're right, the election is going to make a difference. I have clients in Poland and in India, And I travel there. In fact, I'm leaving the end of the month to go back. And, you know, it does, every part of the conversation gets back to what is the US doing about X, Y, and Z? What are companies feeling in the US? What are they doing? Outside the US, it doesn't matter whether you're a UK company, French, or Japanese, they all want to know what US companies are doing. What do we think? What's our decisions? And it is very hard today.
Well,
And
for
I
your
think
Polish
that
clients, you're going to want to add the developing situation in Germany. This has been coming a while, but things are really tricky in Germany, and we in the U.S. are not paying attention to what's going on there.
I think Poland is going to overtake Germany as the industrial capital of Europe here pretty soon.
So David, is that because of the far right in Germany?
Well, this has been coming for a while.
Yeah.
Politically, it's fragmentation in Germany, political fragmentation. It's
So is that
most
driven by the threat of migration into Germany?
migration is one topic.
Mhm.
The consequences of green policies, consequences of social policies on economics. You know, for example, the dysfunction of, say, the German rail system, which has really reached an epic level.
Mhm.
The energy cost structure, which is in part driven by the consequences of the war in Ukraine, the change in the cost of, where Germany gets its energy from, and the cost of it has made swaths of
Mhm.
Germany's traditional energy intensive manufacturing completely uncompetitive.
Mhm.
And they are moving their investment abroad. They are sourcing their products abroad. The cost of electricity.
Oh, it's huge. It's just amazing.
But the politics are now coming to the fore in Germany, and the traditional parties have lost credibility, and now the Greens have lost credibility. So there's a substantial cultural gap between the East and the West in Germany. Unification did take place, but there's a lot of divisions still culturally. And in the East, the right, AFD and the left, extreme left. The elections in East Germany and two of the provinces coming up in a couple of days are going to be really eye-opening. But looking ahead for elections in the western part of Germany, the traditional parties are really in trouble. And it would not surprise me to see the next chancellor be somebody from a very different side of things. AFD is essentially being blackballed by everybody, leaving other what some might call fringe parties the opportunity to take power. But talk about uncertainty. Look
So you
at
have
this
this
situation.
uncertainty going on in Europe, and then what if we turn around in January? I mean, what if we turn around and find ourselves having to absorb a 40 or 45% capital gains tax? What if we start turning into things that really affect the economics of capitalism, our current economics of business, then what does a CEO do? What do shareholders expect? Because the mindset is, I have to continue to operate my business as I have before. Where do I get the capital? How do I manage all that? Well, and as a matter of fact, you're not going to be able to manage a company the way it did before. And so I'm really, as you go back and forth between Latin America, Europe, and in the US, and at least my experience is that most businessmen are concerned about many of the same things. The cost of goods sold, the cost of doing business, with the overarching element of uncertainty. And that I feel it everywhere, and it is really tough.
Interesting.
So what about Russian influence in Europe? Let's just talk about Germany in particular as a target. Um, the I'm trying to stay away from politics, but it's
You
entering
mentioned
into
Russia,
it.
it's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah. So I
Unless you
mean,
want to talk about vodka. I mean, it's kind of hard.
I I I love vodka. So the we all of us on the show here read Wall Street Journal and other stuff and have watched the FBI leader and the CIA guys talk about be prepared. We're under attack, cyber and political. And that's just not us, but they're targeting Europe. And this disruption uh, could really become uh, a major problem there. But look at the violence that has came out of almost nowhere in northern England and in parts of Germany against the migration into those countries.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
immigration
be
is an
I'm trying
explosive
to be
thing.
nice
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yet
yeah.
get the word across.
Well, immigration is going to be is explosive, and it's dangerous stuff to play with, and there are people that want to play it. In terms of this security mindset that's come to the fore, it's everywhere. Everybody's doing it. There's everybody's guilty, everybody's innocent. But I will tell you that the immigration thing is far more consequential than any of the things that we have been talking about in terms of security. If it isn't addressed here in the US in terms of politics, not about the reality of it, but in terms of the politics of it, we're prone to this. I think we're prone to the same kinds of outbreaks of violence here that they
Well,
are in the
I think
UK.
that's true, violence, but in the US, and I think they're experiencing some of this in Europe right now. Europe is a very good um, example that suggests the forecast for the United States. But, if we have an increase of illegal aliens, and we have over 20 million, we have a workforce that's largely not as educated as it was before because we have a lot of people that are leaving the US. So just the education of our workforce has an impact. So the predictability of the education of our workforce, which we've enjoyed for ever since post-World War II, all of that diminishes quite a bit. We can't really predict. And as our foundations of education are affected, then, the expectations of companies becomes out of sync with the expectations of an incoming workforce and the ability and capability of them to produce, to contribute. I mean, it's a very generalized statement, but Europe is feeling that, especially in the UK. I mean, they have people in the workforce that are just not talented. They have no ability to step up and do a lot of the work that needs to be done. Hence, a number of the centers of gravity to the British economy are now leaving UK and leaving Great Britain and Scotland. So, and Ed, you mentioned Russia. Just Russia today, Russia is wealthier than it has ever been. It has a greater international presence than it ever did. And with the exception of only 2 countries of the European Union, they have free access to all countries in Europe. They conduct business like normal in Europe. And all the sanctions, for the most part, don't really work. Most of their wealth comes from oil. And, we've sanctioned all their oil transportation, but they have the world's largest oil fleet. And right now, their gold stockpiles are the highest of any country in the world. So, despite all the field losses that we see on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, Russia is moving forward quite briskly in a number of areas. I mean, I sit in a hotel in the middle of Warsaw, Poland. Poland is probably the most forward-leaning, ready for war country in Europe. But yet I sit in the lobby of a hotel and I'll listen to Russian businessmen all day long. So it's confusing. It's just nobody seems to really be in charge. But you asked about Russia. It's not a wonderful place to live, but they're not hurting right now.
So we have about 15 minutes remaining. If we want to fill that time with more chat, Dr. Ken Lloyd. So give us a people aspect here from a
Yeah.
talent management point of view.
Well, looking at all of the unknowns, I'm reminded of a quote that is something to the effect of, when you look at the past, you kind of feel depressed, and you look at the future, you feel anxiety. So focus on the present and be at peace, but it's really naive to kind of think that, because we could be walking into such a morass. All these various topics that you've brought up that could really portend some very negative outcomes. We're looking specifically at one. Ed, you even mentioned national emergency. I'm wondering if there's any way to at least, if not prevent, forestall the rail strike, stop it from occurring, pull the parties together. Let's see if we can at least prevent that from imminently happening. Then my bigger question is for Hampton and David. Would you two be available to moderate a debate between the two presidential candidates so we can focus on some of these very important substantive issues and get away from some of the name calling? You've raised such important matters that face the U.S. as a nation and the world. These really need to be addressed, as you said, internally by leadership in America. And there are no easy answers, but it'd be interesting to hear what these potential leaders have to say about these critical topics that are looming out there right now.
Hampton?
Well, I don't, there's a lot of responses to that question, but I will make one observation for what, and you can draw a number of conclusions from this. But as I sit and listen to the local news, you turn on TV in the lobbies in India, because they do speak English, and Poland, they speak English better than we do, Estonia, even down in Spain. You just listen to their news. Just turn on the TV and listen to the news, their version of Walter Cronkite, whatever it is. What they cover is 180 degrees different than what we cover here. They are very focused on economics and business, hard news issues. Sometimes there's a bias, but they focus on really hard issues. If I look at the news over here, we really don't. We're really transfixed on social issues, which are important to an element of the population. But the survival of the country is not on what the topics are that we find in the daily news today. It's missing. And it's a very stark difference. You almost think you're not on the same planet. And so it gets to what's the information and awareness level of the population? Well, my impression is in Europe, they're very emotional about a lot of things, but if you ask them questions, they're going to have answers. If you come to the United States and you walk down the sidewalk and you ask people a question about one of the topics that we're talking about, or something more fundamental to what's going on at the local level with the economy and inflation and so forth, they really don't even know. They really don't know. That's a problem. So when you say get people together and what they're going to talk about, I don't know. When Trump was talking to Musk, he had their conversation, and I even posted something about this, and I got 36,000 hits on LinkedIn with it. When they were on their iPhone, the revised estimate of people that were listening in the world is now over 2 billion. 2 people talking on an iPhone. So people want to know, they want information, but in a lot of places they just don't get it. And I think that statistic really speaks volumes about that.
And the unfortunate aspect is a lot of the information that they do get comes off of social media, where
yeah,
who
yeah.
knows what's going on in terms of accuracy, factual data, and
It
basically
affects companies. It affects
propagate.
what they talk about in the boardroom, affects what they talk around the when they work in the office, and it
Yeah.
affects productivity. It affects their expectations. It's I don't know. You know, thank goodness Russia still does produce vodka, because once in a while that's the only thing that you need to sit down and have something like that.
Indeed, indeed. My favorite vodka these days is I get at Trader Joe's, and it's vodka of the gods, and it's $10.99 for
Is
a
it made
giant.
in Encino?
They don't say.
You remember there was a popular beer in Southern California, was made in Torrance, and nobody could figure out how they made it. I don't know, but okay.
This is interesting. Well, thank you for sharing your views and your time and your insight. And I invite you to come back again. So, Hampton, if you're in town on October 22 in Washington, I'm producing from 10 to 2 a live event on K Street,
Yeah, I'll stop by,
19,
I'll buy you a drink. Yeah.
1999 K Street Northwest. It's a global law firm that's my host partner.
They make some good vodka in Poland.
Oh
Hampton,
yeah.
you could bring if you're just while you're there.
I know, I
You could,
know.
no, I don't say you have to drink it now, but you can bring some
No,
back for Ed, it's a party gift,
You guys are forcing me to tell you a story about my mother, who passed away at age 97. And probably a year before her passing, she was at an assisted living place, and I got a voicemail. And it said, "Hi, this is Shana from such and such a care center regarding your mom. I just wanted to tell you that she has run out of vodka. Please bring over a bottle or more as soon as you can." Notice, not running out of diapers, not running out of Ensure. She needs vodka. 97 wonderful years together, the whole ride. And
Wow.
yeah, 3 cheers for vodka.
Yeah, that's great. Nothing in moderation is good. So, Dave, the funding has been assembled to clean up the Tijuana River bullshit.
Well, I don't know how many bulls are involved, but yeah, there's look, that's a complicated topic. There are a lot of moving parts to the sewage problem coming out of Mexico and fouling San Diego beaches. A lot of moving parts. And it seems that things are headed in the right direction. I hope that continues.
Right. Yeah. So what about the change if there is a change in Mexico City political? The guy who's leaving is going out on fire, and the first time it's going to be a woman leader uh, who has been closely aligned with the current guy. So that is like a sea change, isn't it? Or it looks like a sea change, but maybe it isn't.
Um, well, there is a sea change in Mexico that was primarily illustrated by the overwhelming vote at the congressional level for AMLO's party. So in Mexico, they don't have re-election of president. You're in for one term and you move on. But at the congressional level, the vote was overwhelmingly in the direction of this kind of quasi-populist. Mexicans in the broad public sense have been unhappy with the direction of the country for some time. That's why AMLO got in. And the American perspective, the U.S. perspective on Mexico is split along two tracks. One is this, we're going to reshore and friend-shore manufacturing out of China, and it'll go to Mexico, and it'll help us out, you know. And the other having to do with immigration. There's huge security issues inside Mexico, not just in terms of the political shifts and the fact that most of the population feel they aren't benefiting from all of this NAFTA, MCA, or friendshoring. Okay, the security situation in the country is poor, and some of the policies that AMLO is proposing, this latest on the having judges be voted for is getting a lot of attention in DC. Obviously, immigration is getting a ton of attention here. I think that the business community here, political community, are underestimating the Mexican risk.
Mm-hmm.
This is, from here in San Diego, this is a very unpopular thing to say. I mean, Ed, if you package this up and spin it around, there'll be more than a few people that are unhappy with this. But I see real risk in Mexico, and
Well, you realize for Mexico right now that, as in most of Latin America, not all, but most, but Panama for sure, and Mexico, China is now the leading foreign investor in the country. And I was talking to a couple of friends of mine that are in the U.S. State Department, and they attended some public meetings of where China is now fully invested on replicating the Panama Canal through the lower portion of Mexico. And they were originally going to do it through Nicaragua, but now that's shifting into Mexico. Very patient country, and China is. They make investments for the long term, but they are all in on Mexico. And so if you build out the ports in Mexico, which they are, and you even can envision 10 or 15 years from now having another canal that, you know, connects the Atlantic and the Pacific, it really changes the balance of power in the world. It changes the value of currency. Huge issues. So yeah, you're right. It's people are underestimating what's going on south of the border.
So I don't foresee a canal in southern Mexico, and I do see large investment coming out of China. You know, as China looks to get past the trade blocks that the United States and Europe are putting up, you know, Chinese investment in places like Vietnam, or, you know, other places in Southeast Asia, or in Turkey, or you know, in Mexico. But in Mexico, there's a real reaction now against China, against the large flow of Chinese products into Mexico. It's just overwhelming Mexican industry. I'm kind of at a loss for words here. One thing is that binary thinking is a dangerous thing. You know, and playing checkers is, you know,
That's
it's
huge.
fun, but it's much more complex. In Mexico, there is real consternation about how to deal with this. You know, the Chinese are the number one business person arrival in Mexico right now. Those are the delegations that are coming. They're coming with money to invest, and they don't. And India is second, and neither know hardly anything about Mexico, but they're looking for ways to get products into the American market, into the North American market, but primarily the American market, and get past kind of the binary thinking that and policy making that comes out of DC. I just think that this approach to reshoring and friendshoring is simplistic, is not thought through. We want to politicize, and everyone is doing this. It's funny. You get conversations, or you read about. I read coming out of DC, for example, endless comments about the Chinese Communist Party. Well, Vietnam is run by the Communist Party. It's at least as totalitarian as China, but it's not China. It's okay to send investment there, and there's political shifting going on in Vietnam as well. But they've also taken up as much investment as they can realistically handle. Mexico could do very well out of this reshoring. They have infrastructure issues, but the biggest issue is what is from the public side. Where are we benefiting from this?
Mhm. Yeah.
And they're not. So, I mean,
That's right.
From a
That's what people ask in a lot of places.
Yeah.
How are they benefiting from whatever public policy is? And that's huge.
Yes, and I do spend quite a bit of time on the political side of things. Here in the U.S., identity politics, the social issues that you mentioned,
Mhm.
are what is driving the political space. And pragmatism, constructiveness, those are rhinos or weak people. It's like if we need action, we need people to fight for you, to fight for this, to fight for that. Those politicians who are knowledgeable about things, and there aren't many. I mean, the incentive is to be incendiary, to focus on process when it's not incendiary, rather than dealing with practical and pragmatic. There's very little incentive in the political system for that from our public. It's a very interesting time, and for capital, good luck. The maybe the winning move is not to play. And in economics, that's really dangerous, because that means that the engine of moving forward, the momentum goes out of that. And if you're not adrift, like with a ship, Hampton, if you don't have the drive on, it becomes really hard to steer.
Well, our number one trading partner is Mexico. And if that's influenced at a number of levels from China, then it just adds a level of complication and uncertainty across business and government and
sure.
tourism
Yeah.
and border issues and then it becomes very acute at cities and metropolitan areas like San Diego and Arizona and Texas. So I hope that we pay more attention to Mexico. The new president of Mexico is silent on most larger issues. A lot of questions that she's been given lately that she just sort of defers them. So it's very unclear the direction that Mexico will take. But it does have an enormous security problem, and that issue will not go away for quite a while.
One thing on Mexican politics is that a Mexican president has enormous power.
Enormous.
And she's not president yet.
Right.
And her becoming president is going to be complicated by the fact that the existing president is in the background. And historically, Mexican presidents leave office, and while they retain influence, it's in the background. They're not in the foreground. AMLO's history is that he remains active in the foreground. And my sense is that what Claudia Sheinbaum, the new incoming president of Mexico, recent mayor of Mexico City, which is a behemoth of its own, so she has administrative experience and she has political experience. I'm quite certain that she is working very hard behind the scenes to assure that when she takes this very powerful position, that she's protected from excessive influence from AMLO. It's going to be the first months will be very interesting.
Well, Ed, let's have another conference originating from Mexico City.
I think that is a great idea. And
Or Encino.
or we can have a virtual component.
Yeah.
I
And
could go for a road trip. Yeah. Poland
that
would be
is a
fine with
really
me,
good
actually.
idea. Yeah, so but not Cabo San Lucas, though. It needs to be in Mexico City and what, Palenque or Santa Fe or downtown, I guess.
Either way, it's difficult to breathe, but that's okay.
That's interesting. Thank you for being on Global TV.
Thanks, Ed.
I will send you all the program, and there'll be an audio version as well as the notes, as you could see. So thank you very much.
Good to
Thanks
see
a
you,
lot, Carl.
Ken.
Nice meeting you all.
Thanks,
Really
all.
Stanton.
It was so
really an
fun. It was a lot of
education.
fun.
Yeah, great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks, all.
Take
Be
care, Ed.
well.
Bye-bye. Thank you.